Right, shalom, shalom. Toda Rabbi Nasi Kavina for joining, and for everyone else who will be joining, and those who will be watching the replay on YouTube. So we are here in our weekly Parsha study, Parsha Shavuot, and this week it is Acharei Mot-Kedoshim, a dual portion. And today is particularly special because the Botsina Kadisha Yeshiva, the Lenare Kush Community Center of the Chief Rabbinate of Africa was officially, formally inaugurated, consecrated, sanctified, purified, and its doors open to welcome all in the community. So our community center in Paris is officially grounded ceremonially, ritually, and we are so proud of our Chief Rabbinate of Africa, all of our chief rabbis, Chief Rabbi Pinchas Eliyahu Shaddai, Chief Rabbi Elnatan Elchanan, Chief Rabbi Yishai Moshe, Chief Rabbi Zohar, for all the incredible hard work. Hard work doesn't even describe it, but all the incredible work and intentionality in their unity as one for this community, not only the community center, but for the community and for Israel as a whole. So we have something to celebrate today, and in divine timing, of course, this consecration of this holy and sacred space comes right during the week in which we study Acharei Mot-Kedoshim. So just 1 second. I'm going to start the screen share and we will begin. All right. So we begin in Acharei Mot. And what's significant about this doubling of this portion is essentially we are exploring Yesod above and below, consecration and sanctification of Yesod, the portals, the channels of transmission as not only the foundation, and we'll even mention briefly the idea of Eretz Israel as foundation, the foundation stone, some may say, the center of creation, but we'll get to that in a minute. But not only Yesod as the foundation of creation, with the understanding of Yesod representing the reproductive organs of male and female, and the conduit, the channel, the transmission of seed as light, as Or Ein Sof, as Mohin, Chokmah Bina Da'at, particularly in the idea of that linear masculine iteration of Yesod in the sense of what we call the Kav from Ben Ish Chai Datu Tevuna, this channel from the Halal, the womb-like space of the cosmos, this channel of that Or Ein Sof to and as all of creation through the vessels of the Sefirot. This goes into our pre-primordial understanding of the phenomenon of Tzimtzum, leading to not only the birth of the Sefirot, the Midot, the Olamot, but also Shevirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels, and why, as the death of the seven kings, and the nature of instability that needs to be rectified, which necessitates this adventure, this endeavor as physically incarnated beings in this physical dimension, Olam Hazeh, Asiya, this realm associated with and as Malkut that we are called to rectify in, through, and as. But Acharei Mot describes sanctification and atonement through the laws of Yom Kippur, the embodiment of the Kohen Gadol as Yesod, exemplifying the rectification of the Yesod below. But then Kedoshim comes, and throughout that portion, we see the necessity of rectified speech from the mouth, the Yesod above. So as I always like to bring out, Yesod and Pei share the same gematria. And we will dive deeper into how intricately and inextricably they are connected. So Acharei Mot literally means after the death. So this is right at the cusp of the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. After which Aharon was famously silent, already giving us the hint. Aharon as the Kohen Gadol, as this embodiment of the pure Yesod, silence, not silenced. If you know, you know. But Aharon, in his silence, exemplifies the rectification of both Yesodot. That was the expression of the purity that merited him to enter the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And so the portion begins, Bezot Yavo Aharon El HaKodesh HaKodeshim. So, Bezot, with this, the Zohar explains, is the Shekinah. So we're literally seeing Aharon as Kohen Gadol with Shekinah uniting in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So this is a Yakud, behind the veils, behind the curtains, behind the sheets. In this sacred space, there's a Yakud happening. Not in a carnal, fleshly sense, of course, but in the highest sense of Yesod meeting Malkut, entering Malkut. These layers, these successive entryways, deeper and deeper to this portal, is very much likened to the multi-layered and multi-leveled process of descending into the depths of femininity in Yehud, a microcosmic mirror of the very design, the blueprint of the tabernacle, the temple. So only the purist can go behind that final veil and enter to that holiest place. And this can be likened to the portal that is the cervix. The portal that opens not only to receive the seed of the man, but to then contain it, expand it, multiply it, shape, refine it, and then birth it. So ultimately, the Kohen Gadol Aharon HaKohen represents the rectified and perfected Yesod that is not only ready for entering that holy space, but is pure enough to be allowed entry. So Acharei Mot details the laws, especially of Yom Kippur, which govern that access to Shekinah through the purification of the transmission vessel or channel, conduit, which is Yesod. And thus, when the arayot are detailed, the specific acts of forbidden sexual immorality, this is the delineation of those unbalanced unions that distort Yesod and distort covenant and ultimately obstruct the flow of Shefa, which creates an externalization of that Shefa, a crystallization. And we see this in the process even of digestion. When we receive This is one of the um, beauties of the covenant behind even the blessing of the bread at Shabbat, Hamotzi. So with the washing of hands, al netilat yadayim, the acronym of that is ani. So you enter this state of identity, atzmut, this identification, and you understand that your hands on this bread are the hands that are receiving this divine shefa from the hands of Ein Sof Baruch that feeds everything. And remember, everything has its purpose. So again, we don't want to look at the klipot as these enemies that just attack us and devour us and tempt us and are so wicked. It is actually the klipot that are fed through that which is undigested. We know through the digestion process, scientifically, all of the good essences and nutrients are extracted from the food through the digestion process, which itself is a biror in the keli, that is the stomach, the vessel that is the stomach, the biror. It's a separating, sifting, and refining process, the refinement of the nitzotzot, the holy sparks. We know that that process then leaves what is undigested or undigestible to feed the klipot. So everything has its place and everything is fed from the divine Shefa. And this also goes into the hint of the mystery of Baal Peor and the incident of sexual corruption with the Midianite and Moabite women, which, as we well remember, began with the eating of corrupt food. There's always a link between food and intercourse, both forms of consumption, consuming and being consumed. And both forms of yikud. Eating is literally a yikud. This is why we don't eat with our mouths open. Not only because our mama always told us that, but because you are literally exposing Hakadosh Baruch Hu and Shekinah, the Vav and the Hey, when you are eating. There's a union happening there in the upper yesod, the pei, the mouth. And likewise, even the holy sparks being extracted from the food, from the souls reincarnated as that food, those food items, whether mineral, vegetable, or animal, those sparks are now dancing in union, Yakud, with your sparks as they are drawn out. And so there's a union and there's an honor and a respect that should be given there. There's a reverence that should be given for the mutual merit gained as you are doing a divine service of rectification for those souls of the foods. But likewise, they too are helping your soul be rectified through that covenant. So food and intercourse always go together. This is why even idolatry in Mishnah Avodah Zarah, there's so much about food linked to idolatry. Lots, lots to study. Very exciting. This also goes into back to Nadav and Avihu, the fire that consumes as well. Fire as purification, as tikkun. Fire as something into which you can be swallowed up, like Nadav and Avihu, or even Korach. But even that is a chesed, a mercy, to refine the soul. And again, Nadav and Avihu's error was not that they were wicked. It was that they were unbalanced because they were unmarried. Again, emphasizing the importance of righteous union of masculine and feminine through Yahud, through covenant, through marriage. And even as we use the euphemism of the fire that burns, the fire that consumes, we know that lust is often described as a consuming fire, obsession, addiction to people, consuming and being consumed simultaneously. Even when we talk about addiction to drugs, for example, chas v'shalom, that itself is a consumption. You're being consumed by the addiction, even as you consume that substance. And even the idea of burning can, we see even in everyday language, one of the consequences of sexual immorality is sexually transmitted diseases. And what do most people say? They talk about burning. They were burning. So again, I'm always joyfully curious and fascinated how the language of nowadays always reinforces the irrefutable truths of ages. So both Pei, the mouth, and Yesod as these portals of creation and manifestation, these channels, conduits of transmission of Shefa must be pure, so that the Shefa, which is pure, can be disseminated in a righteous way. And Shefa only manifests where masculine and feminine are in Kodesh, holy union. The union of Yesod and Malkut as the reconciliation of Za Ziarabin as Tiferet and Nukva Malkut. The Yesod transmits all of the Orein Sof, all of the vital forces, all of the holy sparks, all of the life force, the life essence, the mohin, the consciousness, sentience, what makes us sentient beings, as science calls it. That Orein Sof, that Shefa, that then in turn manifests into different forms. All of that which is collected through the channel of Yesod is deposited into Malkut, which is the container, the crucible, to use alchemical terms. The crucible is the vessel into which the dross is transformed into the purest matter, the purest gold. So Malkut in her rectified state becomes that crucible, that alchemical container that refines, purifies, expands, multiplies, and then becomes the interface through which that which was deposited and now has expanded is disseminated throughout all of creation. So, as a brief overview, before we get into the text, we want to understand what Shefa is more particularly and where it comes from. So, again, we're always speaking about the seven kings, Shevet HaKelim, and this goes into the seven flows of Shefa, which seven itself, as always, a reminder, is the union of the six, which is Zeir Anpin, Chagat, and Nahiyi, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, and the Nukva, which is Malkut, the seventh. So in our Kavanot, we know that Chesed corresponds to or is embodied by Avraham Avinu. And the Shefa that comes from that Sephira is Chaim, life or living. And this is governed over by the planetary influence we call Shavtai or Saturn. Gevura is Yitzchak, and the Shefa that comes from that Sephira is Shalom, peace, wholeness, which is governed by the influence of Zedek, which among the nations is called Jupiter. Yaakov Avinu, we know, is Tiferet. Also the embodiment of that middle pillar Tiferet as Zeranpin, as Hakadosh Baruch Hu, when he is also rectified in his most righteous state. Chokhmah is the Shefa granted from Yaakov in Sephira Tiferet, influenced by Ma'adim, which is Mars, which is interesting because most people, through mythology or otherwise, associate Mars with war. And here we have Chokhmah, wisdom, being the Shefa that comes from this influence. Then we have Moshe Rabbeinu in Sephira Netzach, giving us the Shefa of Chen, which is grace, ruled over by Chama. Aharon, Kohen Gadol, from Sephira Hod, gives us the Shefa of wealth, all share, aligned with the influence of Noga, which is Venus. Yosef HaTzadik, Yesod, giving us the Shefa of course, seed, Zerah, which is fertility in all its forms, not only physical children, but forms of abundance, forms of creativity, creative pleasure that comes from the highest spiritual intentions. And that Sephira and that Shefa is influenced by Chokav, which some call Mercury. And David HaMelech, the beloved. Sephira Makut, which gives us the Shefa of Memshalah, which is authority to govern, or government, or governance, and even the safety of that. And that is influenced by Levana, the moon, which is also our Shekinah, which is also our Shabbat. And as paradoxical as it may seem, David HaMelech, the ultimate king, the king archetype, is represented by this feminine Sephira, because it is the receptivity that he embodies as Makut. Because to be a king, not only a king, but Dawi Dodi, the beloved, just like a husband gives everything to his beloved, all is given to David Hamelech, given to the king. Even if we want to look at Ziarampin, but I won't conflate the two too much. It's very complex. But David Hamelech receives all with which he governs the kingdom. The king has to receive the Shefa, all of these Shefa, the Chaim, the Shalom, the Chokhmah. He has to have the wisdom, the wholeness, the life, the liveliness, the fertility, the abundance, the wealth, the ability to govern. All of these forms of Shefa he must receive to in turn give to the kingdom, to all of his subjects. This will also goes into Malkut as Eretz Israel, Eretz Zvi, another code name for not the state of Israel, but the state of being of the soul level of Adam HaYisraeli, where the Torah Aleph is embodied everywhere you are. That is the foundation of creation. That is the center of the universe. And the secret of Eretz Israel being called Eretz Zvi as Tevel, the elevated form, because Tevel and Eretz are not one and the same. But Eretz Zvi gives us a hint to the expansive nature of the land. Just as Malkut, again, as the vessel, the container, the receiver, expands what is deposited into it, expands and multiplies it. So, of course, we know that all of these seven flows of Shepha and all of their correspondences that I just named are also aligned to and corresponded with the seven kings. And I'm going to run and plug my laptop in 1 minute. So the seven kings correspond to the seven flows of Shepha as well. And there is an intricate mystery that we learn in Tikkunei Zohar, and it's also elaborated through what we learn in Ben Ishchai's Datu Tevuna with the foundation and framing of the Shulchan Aruch of the Arizal, Ibn Hashulam, and Tractate Ketubot, the understanding again of Eretz Zvi, Eretz Israel, and the different forms of Shefa that are given to those within Eretz Israel, Eretz Zvi, the Yoshvei Tevel, and those outside of it. Again, not speaking socially, politically, nationally, but the spiritual state of being Israel and dwelling in the reality of the Torah Aleph, of unity. Inside there, all the seven forms of Shefa are given directly from the Shekinah. Outside of that, there's an interface. The beauty of being Eretz Israel is receiving the seven forms of Shefa direct from Shekinah. So beginning to read. Origins and spiritual impacts of sexual corruption. The Parshiot, Acharei, Mot, and Kedoshim constitute the heart of Leviticus and address the holiness of the people of Israel through inseparable ritual and moral dimensions. The first, Acharei Mot, opens with the preparations for the Yom Kippur service. The Parashiot, Acharei, Mot, and Kedoshim constitute the heart of Leviticus and address the holiness of the people of Israel through inseparable ritual and moral dimensions. The first, Acharei Mot, opens with the preparations for the Yom Kippur service, where the high priest enters the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, to atone for the people's sins, illustrated by the symbolic rite of the two goats sent to Azazel. This section also emphasizes the centralization of worship by prohibiting sacrifices outside the tabernacle, bans the consumption of blood, considered the seed of life, and establishes rigorous laws against sexual immorality to distinguish Israel from the surrounding pagan practices. For its part, Parsha Kedoshim extends this call with the fundamental injunction to become holy in the image of God, translating this spirituality into concrete social and religious ethics. It codifies justice toward others through the love of one's neighbor, respect for the elderly, honesty in labor, and agricultural charity laws for the underprivileged. Simultaneously, it reinforces ritual holiness through the observance of Shabbat, the absolute rejection of idolatry, and the respect for natural separations, such as the mixing of fibers in clothing or plant species. In short, while Acharei Mot focuses on purification and the mastery of impulses, Kedoshim defines holiness not as isolation, but as a daily practice of integrity and compassion. The Ari HaKadosh, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, through the Zohar and the writings of his disciple, Rabbi Chaim Vital, notably in Sha'ar HaPesukim and Etz Chaim, brings a profound mystical dimension to the sexual prohibitions of Parsha Acharei Mot. For him, these laws are not merely moral rules, but mechanisms for protecting the spiritual structures of the universe. He develops this idea even further by showing that all of reality is built around a process of repair, tikkun, following a primordial rupture known as Shevirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels. In this rupture, sparks of divine light, nitzotzot, fell and became trapped within the klipot, the shells of impurity. Since then, the mission of humanity, and in particular of spiritually authentic Israelites, has been to recover and elevate these sparks by reconnecting them to their source. Within this framework, the Ari explains that all human actions carry cosmic significance, but actions related to sexuality are the most powerful because they directly touch the creation of life and therefore the transmission of divine energy into the world. When a person acts in holiness within the boundaries permitted by the Torah, they elevate these sparks. The union becomes an act of repair that releases trapped light and restores it to holiness. By contrast, a forbidden relationship produces the opposite effect. Instead of extracting sparks from the klipot, it drives them deeper into them and can even put new holy energies down into that realm. This is what the Ari describes as a destructive mixture, irbuv, where the boundaries between the pure and impure are blurred. This point is crucial. According to him, in a sexual transgression, divine energy itself is diverted. It does not disappear, nothing divine ever disappears, but it is captured by the forces of the Sitra Achra, the other side, which gives them vitality and strength. In other words, the transgression does not merely create a deficiency, it actively feeds negative forces. Regarding the spiritual channels, the Ari greatly expands on the role of Sephira Yesod, foundation. Yesod is the point of transmission between the upper realms, the divine emotional attributes, and Malkut, the manifestation of divine presence in the world. It is a channel of transmission, connection, and union. In men and women, this corresponds to the capacity for relationship and bonding, specifically through the organ of the covenant, Brit, the reproductive organ. When this channel is pure, the divine flow, Shefa, descends harmoniously, nourishing the world with blessing. However, when it is damaged, Pagam Habrit, a kind of spiritual short circuit occurs. The flow does not disappear, but is redirected toward impure systems. The Ari compares this to a leak in a circuit. The energy continues to flow, but it feeds the wrong place. This is why sexual transgressions are considered particularly grave in the Torah of Sod, Kabbalah. They strike at the very root of the life force. They are not merely individual acts, but disruptions in the spiritual architecture of the world. Regarding Egypt and Canaan, the Ari goes even further, explaining that these places were reservoirs of accumulated impurity. Egypt, in particular, is described as the lowest level of the 50 gates of impurity. Deviant sexual practices that were not only moral or cultural, but ritualistic and energetic, they were designed to manipulate spiritual flows to feed the klipot. When the Israelites left Egypt after 210 years as Bnei Israel, or 400 years as the Am Bnei Israel, they were also exiting this spiritual structure. This is why the Torah insists so forcefully. Falling back into these practices is not just behaving badly, it is returning to a spiritual system of slavery. So because the baby's up, I'm going to protect her being off camera. So my camera will be off for a little bit. Toda Rabbi for understanding. Okay, one thing I wanted to point out in the text when it speaks about the Torah of Sod in Kabbalah. And many people would like to think they understand what Kabbalah is. I see people, some people saying the Kabbalah like it's a specific book. Like, I read this in the Kabbalah. Like, what is the Kabbalah? So people have all kind of terms that they would like to approximate to what they think Kabbalah is, or Kabbalah. But essentially, the authentic Mekubalim, the B'nai Aliyah, understand that it is the Torah of Sod. And the light of Ein Sof and its accompanying Shefa is always comprised of the four levels: Pardes, Peshat, Remesh, Drash, and Sod, which correspond to the four Olamot and the four letters of the Tetragrammaton, and the four levels even of the manifestations of the Partsufim, which, as always, as a reminder, whenever we see four, we know that there's five. There's always the hidden that transcends even above purity. So as we usually understand the order in ascending order from least pure to most pure, we know that Peshat is Asiyah, Malchut, Nukva. We know that Remes is Yetzirah, Drash is Beria, Sod is Atzilut. But even as we say Atzilut is the purest or the completely pure of the Olamot, we know there's something even above that that is hidden, that is beyond definition, beyond even the duality of separation between pure and impure. But when we are learning Torah in these levels of Pardes, we know that it is the order and self disseminated through these four levels. And the order itself is the Shefa that is given through the 12 parts of Eve, 6 masculine and 6 feminine. There's always a Yikud, a union occurring to integrate front and back, high and low, dark and light, black and white, Choshech, or. And this is the functionality of the parts of Eve. We have the level of Atik Yomin and his wife, his Nukva, Arik Ampin and his Nukva, Abba and Ima. And even on other levels, we have Israel, Sabah, and Tevuna, just as we learned in the weekly limud, the public limud, of the distinction between Ima at the level of Bina and Tevuna. There's also Abba at the level of Abba and Israel, Sabah. And we know that the Vav, Zianapin, is also Israel at the higher manifestation, or Yaakov, with Leah as the Nukva and Yisrael as Rachel. And even when we say our Birkat Hamatzon, the blessings of the Birkat Hamatzon, we literally intend in those prayers that the Mohin be passed from Yaakov and Leah and Yisrael and Rachel. The Mohin being the masculine lights connecting one to holiness, sent through that transmitory channel, that conduit that is Yesod, also the Kav, which itself in many ways is androgynous, more like a corkscrew containing Yashar and Igul configuration at the same time, through which Or Ein Sof is disseminated. So each masculine manifestation gives the Mohin to his feminine counterpart, his Nukva, his container, the vessel, through that pipe. incarnated as the Yesod or the Brit Milah, rectified through Brit Milah. The Kav is the Yesod through which the Mohin is sent as that Zerah, that seed. Hence again, why Yosef HaTzadik is the embodiment of Sefer Yesod and the grantor of the Shefa of Zerah, fertility, seed, the capacity to create, to multiply. The seed of the man deposited, or the seed of the masculine, is the place where the light of Ein Sof is standing. This elucidation of Egypt and Canaan, Mitzrayim and Canaan, is really intriguing when we think about even the history of the trans-Saharan and the transatlantic slave trade. So this connection between Yesod and Pei, the mouth, these portals of creation, what is manifested through the covenant created by Brit Milah, as well as Brit Lashon, the covenant of the mouth that should be guarded just as diligently and vigilantly. We already alluded to the connection between the consumption of food and the sexual immorality with which Israel was blemished with the Midianite and Moabite women. But there's also hints that we see behind the mass castration throughout the history of the trans-Saharan and transatlantic slave trades. We are very familiar with the gruesomeness, unfortunately, and the mutilation and castration of the Black men who were lynched throughout the Americas. But I think there may be some who are less familiar with the ubiquitousness of this same practice throughout the countries of the so-called Middle East, through the trans-Saharan slave trade, and particularly in the Ottoman Empire, in the royal courts, the eunuchs who were Africans, Black men, routinely castrated. Why is there continuously this fixation and obsession with the Yesod of the Bantu Israelite? And specifically, when we come back to the lynching phenomena in the Americas, we usually see this direct correspondence with wealth and the lies that were proliferated by the mouth, Lashon Hara, the danger of Lashon Hara, lying, gossip, accusation, which in a moment we'll even be getting into Yom Kippur and atonement and the rectification of speech from accusation to speech of confession through the vidui and selichot. But notice there was always usually a woman, a white woman, lying about being sexually violated in some way or another, to one degree or another, leading to such gruesome torture and murder. And the cutting off of this yesod. So something created by the mouth led to the destruction, Pagam Habrit, the damage of the Yesod, the conduit of divine transmission, the conduit of blessing. And so it gives us something to think about, especially when you read specifically about the lynchings in the Americas. There's a book called 100 Years of Lynching that meticulously documents each incident, I guess, murder, each crime, and the background. And you will see that these weren't just random killings, random tyranny. They were targeted because they were wealthy. These were landowners. These were entrepreneurs, business owners, wealthy, successful, with seemingly that abundance of shefa and favor. These were the ones targeted with lies to justify the gruesome murders and mutilations, connected to taking the land from us so that we cannot manifest that tevel, that eretz tzvi, so we could not manifest that place where our Torah Aleph was lived and upheld. They had to corrupt the Brit, they had to corrupt the Yesod, damage it, desecrate it, mutilate it, cut it off to block that obstruction of blessings because we were favored, highly favored. Many people skip over the Reconstruction era, but after the so-called emancipation, we were the wealthiest, the most elegant, the most united, and in many ways, the strongest we had ever been as a community, as a collective. And they hated that. And they targeted us to take the land from us, to take the Malkut. They cut off the Yesod so that the Malkut could not receive the Shefa. And this even brings me, I think about that saying, cut down in the prime of life, or some say even the pride of life, to be cut down in the pride of life. This is where we have to get our priorities in order at the same time. Because again, when you're in Eretz Israel, the code for Tevel, the code for Eretz Zvi, the code for where the Torah Aleph is manifest, you receive Shefa direct from Shekinah. But outside of that, you receive Shefa from something or someone else. And this is why they even say in the world, every blessing don't come from God. So some people say it in different ways. Many forces or entities can bless you with many different things. But where is that shefa coming from? What is the source of that shefa? And better yet, what will it do to you? Because even that can consume you if your desires are not aligned with the Kedusha. So people think that they're blessed with wealth, with money. But if it comes from an impure source, it becomes an impurity that makes one impure. That brings pride and arrogance, a sense of hierarchy, a sense of being better than someone, a separation instead of unity in humility. So where one is not willingly humble, one will be forcibly humbled, which is also part of the tikkun, as gruesome as it is, of the lynchings and the castrations. Symbolic on so many levels. Not only the physicality, the carnality of that obsession with that organ, but spiritually what it represents. So with our kavanot, in everything that we do, l'shem yakud kut shabriku, we return and restore malkut to the perfected and rectified yesod, because restored Shekinah is our source of shefa. So those gates of impurity, as it says here in the text, with Egypt and Canaan, Mitzrayim and Canaan, which we can extend even to what I spoke about with our enslavement amongst the so-called Arabs, amongst the so-called um, Americas. Something else I wanted to point out in the text, this term irbuv sounds very similar to eruv or even erev, but irbuv is a mixture of confusion versus a unification that is in holiness. So the irbuv mentioned here is this destructive mixture, this mixture of confusion. I think about that Temptation song, ball of confusion, ball of confusion. This confused mixture is an admixture, an adulteration that does not bring the refinement of souls. Whereas the eruv we speak about in Mishnah Shabbat, the act of making the eruv on Shabbat to be able to carry out or to carry in, to be able to even cook for the chagim, for the feasts. That is creating a spiritual boundary, delineating holy union. So the eruv, the space created by the eruv, is the carmelit, the neutral ground, the liminality, the transcendent state of unity. Again, where there's no back front, up, down, light, dark, masculine, feminine, pure, impure. This holy space, neutral, liminal, united, transcendent, that transcends duality and egoic separation. That liminality of that unity is a space of neutrality or neutralization of forces, nullification of the forces of imbalance. And through that unity, it's a sacred space of elevation, the realm of the Torah Aleph, which is simultaneously called Gan Eden, the orchard, and Pardes, the four levels, united, which is also why Adam Harishon's sin was not only eating the fruit through the Yesod above before Shabbat, but also making Yakud with his wife, with the Yesod below, as well prematurely. So the importance of union, Yakud, even in the concept of the Eruv or the Irbuv, the importance of delineating righteous unity, Yehud, versus that confused admixture, that adulteration. And even there, we hear the echo of adultery, part of the arayot. Again, why sexual immorality must be so fiercely guarded against? Because it creates a mismanagement and a misdirection of the flows of Shefa as abundance and inheritance. Because think about it, even on a very basic human level, when we think of adultery, when we think of that old saying, mama's baby, daddy's maybe, there's the question of property, ownership, possession, protection, and investment and inheritance. To whom will one's name, one's legacy, one's wealth, one's abundance, even one's mohin, one's consciousness be passed to when there's an adulterated union? A confusion in and confusion about the mixture, the irbuv. So the Vav and the Hey Zianapin and Nukva were given the capacity for zivug, yakut, union, intimacy, the capacity for pleasure that can elevate to a higher state of being through that reunion of the two waters, Mayim Dukrin and Mayim Nuvin, because in the beginning, the waters were one. We saw where the waters were divided, the upper and lower waters, the Mayim Dukrin, the masculine waters of emanation, giving, and the feminine waters that are aroused from below to ascend. This must also remind us this primordial separation, division, and creation of seeming hierarchy, an illusion of hierarchy, something above and something below, something higher and lower. This should also remind us of the Zoharic tale of the diminishment of the moon, which leads to the separation for the sake of reunification of masculine and feminine union. Again, which is why the eighth king Hadar is that salvific figure because of that perfect union with his wife Mehetabel that the other seven kings lacked. And in that imbalance, the vessels shattered, unable to rightly carry that order in self, the light of limitlessness, limitlessness as no boundaries, no separation, no duality, no polarity, no separation. Imagine, even in your own self, your own mind, imagine trying to carry limitlessness, to be everything and everyone. The vessels have to be properly rectified and sweetened to have the balance to be able to carry that. So we always talk about the Vav and the Hay, Zianabin and Nukva, and their intimacy, their Yehud, their coming together. But Abba and Ima are already united. And Abba and Ima brings the light through that the Kav, to give the possibility of birthing those high souls or high lights of consciousness from Atzilut that are passed to Zeranpin as the Vav through Yesod of Ima Ilah, who then passes it to his Nukva, the Yesod conduit depositing into Malkut. So union is very important because all suffering comes from the illusion of separation, which is the deception of the ego that gives one frame and form. I am this, you are not. So separation is death, exile, the galut. And the suffering of which causes that heaviness that compels that longing to return through teshuvah to the reconciled, rectified state of that Yakud of Hakadosh Baruch Hu and Shekhinah. As it is said, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So the Ma'in Nugvin is that force within us that compels us to elevate out of desire for ascension and union, to rise to meet that beloved, like the woman in Shir Hashirim, rising to meet the beloved knocking at the door. Ze'erampin, the beautiful prince, Tiferet, the prince of peace, shalom, wholeness, balance, that harmony of that middle pillar. This is also why Yaakov Avinu, who represents or embodies Tiferet, gave his sons the Shema, the injunction of the recitation of Shema, so that they would not lose that quality of soul that is called Yisrael. Not only sons, physical sons of a man called Yisrael, it was Yaakov Avinu who inherited the state of Israel, the state of being, the spiritual state of Israel as a consciousness of Echad, which is codified in the Shema, which is given as a daily recitation and reminder of that mindset we should be in as Yoshvei Tevel, B'nai Aliyah. And so when we go through exile and suffering from enslavement and the desecrations of that elusive experience, in which that unity itself seems elusive, this sense of suffering and humbling serves to create or trigger or stimulate that arousal from below, which then compels the Ma'im Dukrim to send down that Shefa. And this should remind us of the phenomenon that is called the Rain Man. In American culture, Black American culture, hip hop culture, even, we hear about this Rain Man. We hear about making it rain. And this calling for rain, calling for these drops, calling for the pouring down of this Mayim Dukrim. We even think of Rain Down on Me. All the songs, even the SWV song that they made into a church song for some reason. Well, we're calling for these drops of the Order in Sof, that rectified, sanctified, Yesod transmission of that divine light. But rain can also be a storm, punishment, a sense of troubles that rain down on your head. These are some sayings that we may have heard people say or read in books or heard in movies, film, about punishments, suffering, raining down. When the Gevurot overtake the Yesod, but through the Brit Milah and Brit Lashon, the Chassidim descend and sweeten that crown, which is, when revealed through removing that Orlah, the Malkut Nukva, Shekinah, rectified and elevated to Ataret HaYesod, the crown of her husband. Thus the mystery of the verse. Just like Malkut elevated is the Nukva, or the daughter-in-law, elevated to Bina Ima Ila'ah, we remember that figure 8, that infinite cycle. The mother's Mohin transmitted through Yesod Ima Ila'ah to Zianapin. It's then transmitted through his Yesod channel to his Nukva Malkut, his wife, the daughter-in-law, then becomes the embodiment of the same Mohin of the mother. The Malkut, which was a land or a kingdom inhabited by the king, just like he sits on his throne in his kingdom surrounded by his subjects, like a Yesod is surrounded by that halal space. Likewise, simultaneously, she that encompasses him is also his crown. Mother is the first crown. And the Nukva, the wife, likewise becomes the crown. Oh, the channel of transmission connection, that just reminded me. I was thinking as well about this dichotomy, or seeming dichotomy, itself perhaps an illusion of duality, between love and lust. Lust seems to be, again, that fire that consumes, obsession and addiction, driven from an objectification and thus an othering of someone's body to be conquered and to be subdued and consumed, versus this elevated desire to unite with and within someone as oneself, seeing the mirror of the beloved, even as it dissolves into your own face. Because eventually the mirror is transcended to where there's no longer a mirror between you, reflecting you, and it's just you as the two that became one, that are one, that always were one. And so we can think of lust as a damaged form of that compulsion to connect, to unify. It's a distortion. But like all distortions, it too can be rectified and elevated and sanctified. I read that paragraph here. Okay. The connection to the spirituality of the space known as Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, becomes clearer through this logic. For the Ari, the land of Israel is not like any other land. It is directly connected to Malkut in its purest form, without passing through angelic intermediaries like other nations. This means the divine presence there is more direct, but also more demanding. When human actions align with holiness, the land responds positively and is clothed in the spiritual stature named Yisrael. However, when they introduce an impure mixture, such as sexual depravity by ostentatiously transgressing the Torah laws of family purity, a dissonance occurs, resulting in a total loss of the authentic spiritual stature of Israel. The expression, the land will vomit you out, is understood literally in this system. There is an energetic incompatibility, like a body rejecting a foreign object. Regarding Tikkun, the Ari teaches something very powerful. The same force that can destroy is the one that can repair. Sexual energy, when mastered and directed correctly, becomes one of the greatest sources of unification, Yakut, between the spiritual worlds. A permitted union, lived with consciousness and holiness, creates harmony between the Sefirot, specifically between Yesod and Malkut, allowing the divine presence, Shekhinah, to reside in the world. Thus, holiness is not a negation of the body, but its transformation. Desire becomes a keli, a vessel for divine light. Consequently, for the Ari Hakadosh, the laws of Arayot, sexual prohibitions, are not just restrictions. They define how a person participates in either the repair of the world or its fragmentation. Now, before we go into the conclusion of the words of the chief rabbi, I did want to read a bit out of Pri Etz Chaim, to go into some of the mysteries of Yom Kippur. Thank you all for your patience as well. I know we are over time, but it's just such a rich portion. I really do want to at least read through the excerpt of Pri Etz Chaim and the conclusion of the words of the chief rabbi. Is that all right with you all? I hope so. Okay.
Thankful to be able to study together, Rabbi.
Yay! As am I. It is a gift. Um, Go out to get my translation. Marital relations, washing, and so forth. These are the five afflictions of Yom Kippur. We don't eat, we don't drink, we don't have Yehud, etc. We will explain the essential nature of the five afflictions of Yom Kippur, what they are. Know that we have already explained how, during these 10 days, all the judgments are separated to her, the feminine, Makut, and afterward they are somewhat sweetened through Zeranpin himself. Yet despite this, an additional sweetening is still required in order that she may be able to be with him face to face, and so that he will not say to her, "Turn your eyes away from me, for they have overwhelmed me." For they, the judgments, burn me with the intensity of their force. Therefore now she must be sweetened from Binah itself. And behold, until now, throughout the entire year, she and Zianapine had the secret of eating and drinking, washing and anointing. All of these came from Bina itself, which provides to them. But now, since she must receive the sweetening of the judgments not through Zayanapin, she must therefore ascend above him and rises up to Bina itself. And once she is there, she is not nourished from Bina in the usual way, but rather from the place where Bina itself eats and drinks and washes and so forth. Thus, all these five former things are now nullified, because what now comes to her is from above, from a higher place, and those levels above that are not graspable to us, for they are all in the secret of the breath of the mouth alone. And from there she is nourished. Therefore, we are unable to eat and drink because these lower forms have already been fulfilled. Oh, my apologies, have already been nullified. But corresponding to those five things, they now come to her in the secret of the breath of the mouth, and therefore we have, corresponding to them, five prayers on this day in the secret of this breath. And this is the secret of the verse: man does not live by bread alone, but by everything that proceeds from the mouth of Hashem, which is the breath, Sheva. And as we have explained, Bezrat Hashem, in this very verse, bread, lechem, has the numerical value of three chavayot, the three divine names, Yod He Vav He, which together equal the value of mazlah, the flow of spiritual influx, and from there bread is drawn. But now on Yom Kippur, one is nourished from that which issues from the mouth of Hashem, which is the secret of the breath alone. As it is written, all these five things are drawn to Zianabin and Nukva from the externality of Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod of Binah. But now she, Malkut, is nourished from the inner dimension, Penamiot, which are the five inner voices within themselves, and these are the secret of the inner Mohim. It is found, therefore, that the secret of eating and drinking on this day comes from the inner dimension of the Mohin within Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Charat, Nachi of Binah, which are called the five voices. And so too is the matter on a fast day, that a person is nourished from his own Mohin, as is known. Another interesting fact attested by our sages is that when one fasts, the very scent, the fragrance of the mouth fasting is like that of the ascending offerings. I thought I would add that. That always stood out to me. Therefore, you will find that affliction has the numerical value of fast, zone, and it also equals kol, voice. And the matter is that there are five supernal voices which correspond to the five prayers of this day. And this is the secret of the verse, from the voices of many waters. And the initial letters of Adirim Mishpere Yam, Adir Ba Marom Hashem, which form the acronym Ami Avi, my mother, my father. That is to say, there are supernal voices from which Abba and Ima themselves are nourished. And from these, Malkut is now nourished on this day. However, these five voices are the secret of the river Perat Euphrates, for Binah includes all four rivers as mentioned in the Midrash, and within it are included all the many waters. Therefore, 5 times voice, kol, equals the numerical value of Perat. And now on this day, even though Zeranpin does not ascend and draw from there, nevertheless, since we do not receive nourishment from Zeranpin, but rather only through the Nukva, the feminine, and the Nukva herself is above, having ascended, therefore even the males fast on this day. And it seems to explain that which we say, Hashem hu ha-Elohim, which I'm actually going into chapter 5, which should be on the screen now. And it seems to me to explain that which we say Hashem hu ha-Elohim 7 times in repetition. And the matter is as follows. Hashem hu ha-Elohim corresponds to Ze'erampin, which ascends up to the Nukva, for he is subordinate to her on this day, and she ascends first, and afterward he ascends. And this is the meaning of Hashem hu ha-Elohim. Hashem refers to Ze'erampin, which ascends to the Nukva, who is called Elohim. Remember, Elohim is from the feminine. It's the feminine manifestation. Thus, judgment associated with Geburot, the left side, the feminine side. Afterward, we return again to say Hashem hu ha-Elohim with regard to Atik. Hashem corresponds to Atik and Elohim to Ze'erampin, which has now returned to being Elohim, for Ze'erampin is now in its proper place. And you already know from the Idra Rabbah that Ze'erampin is called Elohim relative to Atik. And within this name Elohim are included Zun and Ima, for all of them are called by the name Elohim as is known. So Zun is Ze'erampin and Nukva together, and Ima. Thus, although we say Hashem hu ha-Elohim twice, it is considered as one expression, and it must be said 14 times, which are 7 doubled, yet they are only counted as 7. The matter of what we say and seal us, and the sealing in the prayer of Neilah, the closing prayers of the Yom Kippur service, when it is said the gates are closing, we'll come back to those gates in a second. The matter of when we say and seal us, sealing the prayers of Neilah is because Malkut does not receive the 5 Gevurot of Ima until after the completion of the 5 prayers. Therefore, at Neilah, the 5 Gevurot are completed, and then there is formed within her the secret of Yesod. So remember earlier when we saw Chagat Nahi, but not Nahi. So we saw Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, and Hod of Bina was named, but not Yesod. But now at Neilah, the 5 Gevurot are completed, and there is formed within her the secret of Yesod. Can we guess what that is? The Nekudat Zion. So we know that man and woman are not different. They're just reflections of each other. And every woman has a Nekudat Zion within her, the secret of Yesod. That point of Zion, point, which is called the seal, Kotam. And this is what is sealed within her line structure, from Chesed to Hod within her for the 5 Gevurot spread there, and their illumination gathers into her Yesod. And the seal is formed, which is the vessel wherein the collected Ma'in Nugvin, feminine waters, are placed. And these are the 5 Gevurot to elevate them in order to receive Ma'in Dukvrin, the arousal from below that stimulates the giving of the masculine waters. So much could be said there about even the inversion of the proper order in the perversion of today's society. You have so many men, unlike Aharon, Kohen Gadol, who enter without purity and try to deposit something into that holiest of holies, that divine portal, when they have not merited that depth of entry, when the space is not softened and sweetened and elevated to open, to receive that flow and that seed. It is the feminine arousal from below that compels the masculine to give, not to take for his pleasure. Her arousal precedes his entry. So many men are entering without even the arousal, causing pain and desecration, like the sanctuary of the Shekinah that was desecrated. Yeah. So in the zivug of Yom Kippur, Bezot with Shekinah, he entered. Yesod and Malkut, Zah and Nukva, only the purest can enter. And for all my sisters, this is how we need to be vigilant about guarding our Kodesh HaKodeshim, our Kalal, our sacred space, the temple, the tabernacle, the sacred portal beyond many veils, beyond the curtains. And we know in the Kodesh HaKodeshim is the Kapirot, the mercy seat, where the divine presence descends between the cherubim, who, when Yisrael is righteous, the cherubim are facing each other in intimate embrace. But when Israel strays into that impurity, the cherubim do not even face each other. There's no yichud, there's no presence at the mercy seat. And it is also there at that seat that the atonement of Yom Kippur is made. And so even the goats that are offered, the bloodshed, is paired with the ketoret. One is rectifying Yesod, which any entry of Yesod into Malkut is always a blood covenant. This is why marriage is a blood covenant, because ideally, if everyone was a virgin, the man and the woman, there would be a bloodshed at that moment of sacred entry into that holy space. And the ketoret is the rectification of the yesod above, the mouth, the breath, the words. This is also why in Parshat Korach, there's this intimate link between the incense and Lashon Hara. And again, the fire that consumes and purifies. The ketoret that removes that plague of sexual immorality from Israel. The 11 spices of ketoret, the 11 besamim, the mixture of the sweet spices, the resins, and even the harsh acidness of the chelbana, the galbanum. There has to be unity. Harshness and sweetness come together to raise the sparks in holiness. And we know a huge part of Yom Kippur is the recitation of the vidui, the selichot, this confession by the mouth. The same mouth, as I said, that when fasting gives the aroma of that burning sacrifice. The mouth confesses to rectify the speech, the breath, the ruach, to unity. Because when you're saying Lashon Hara, when you're judging someone, when you're gossiping, there's an inherent sense of immunity. Like, I'm better than this person, so I can say this about this person. But when you confess, it's an inclusion. It's saying, I'm a sinner too. It's a humility that is an embodiment of unity. Because you're confessing also not even only for yourself and your specific sins in this lifetime, but also your previous selves from previous lives and your ancestors together, and even your household and your children. When you say vidui, me and my household, we. But when you gossiping, oh, he did that, she did that, this person, that other, that one, not we, because you want to put somebody else down with your words and exclude yourself. But in vidui, salikot, it's we. We have transgressed. We have abandoned your ways. We ask forgiveness. Forgiveness of ourselves and each other. The ability to forgive yourself and be forgiven. A lot of times people think forgiveness is easy, but even to accept being forgiven sometimes is so hard. Harder than people realize. The ability to forgive yourself. So the sweetness of Keteret is the sweetness of that rectified speech of unity. Achava and Echad. Love your neighbor as yourself. Even elevating one up to the gate of Yechidah, the soul level of Yechidah, of Yisrael. And this is at the moment the gates are closing in Neilah, the Neilah prayers. And it is said that the gates are closed except one, the gate of Yechidah. So to go back to the text, the seal is formed, which is the vessel wherein the collected Ma'in Nuvin are placed. By the way, the Nekudat Zion, that seal, that secret of Yesod that is in the feminine, we'll just say it really makes you wonder why certain cultures are so obsessed with the practice of female genital mutilation. The seal is formed, which is the vessel wherein the collected Ma'in Nuvin are placed, and these are the five Geburot to elevate them in order to receive Ma'in Dukrin. And this is made from the three Echye names, Echye, Asher, Echye. And their milieu expansions of the Yudin, the Chechin, and the Alfin. So the expansions of the name, when you write Yod Ke Vav Ke and you expand it out, when you write Echye and you expand it out into the individual letters and the spelling of the letters, and you fill them with Yuds, with Hays, or with the Alephs, Alfin. Within the Netzach hold Yesod of Ima, as is known, and they equal the numerical value of Chotam, as stated. And this is completed in the prayer of Neilah. The second seal, which is her Malkut, is completed on the night of Hoshana Rabbah. And from Eitz Chaim, the seal of Neilah is expanded at length in the gate of the night of Hoshana Rabbah, all the seals of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hoshana Rabbah seek them there. He's basically saying this was in a previous chapter of the text. It is already known there are boundary, seal, and wall. On Yom Kippur, Rachel, Malkut, ascends into Ima, and it is known that Echye is in Bina. And there are 3 expansions of Echye, equaling 161, 151, 143, totaling 455, and with the 3 inclusions equals Chotam. And the 2 alepphs of these 2 names are the secret of the 2,000 cubits of the Shabbat boundary. Again, back to the Eruv. When you make the Eruv, you say, with this Eruv, may we be permitted to walk 2,000 cubits in each direction on this Shabbat. The Eruv, the Erev, the Carmelit, the Pardes, the Gan Eden, the Torah Aleph, and the 2 alephs of the 2 names are the secret of the 2,000 cubits of the Shabbat boundary. For the aleph of Echye in the milieu of Yudin, which is the root and essence, corresponds to the 1,000 cubits within the city, and the 2,000 cubits of the alephs and hays correspond to the 2,000 cubits that one may walk in any direction he desires. Whew. Wonderful. Glad we got through that. So I'm going to go back to the PDF. We are going to make our way to closing. So another thing about the beautiful infinite cycle of mirroring and embodiment between Bina and Malkut is when Malkut becomes not only the crown, Acharei Yesod, but becomes the gate, specifically the 50 gates of Bina, Acharei Nun, or Nun Acharei Bina. This is the name Adonai, also known as gate. So Adonai is the upper level of Bina, but it is also when Malkut is dressed in the garments of Bina. And I like to think again in this extended analogy, this extended metaphor of the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, of it being something akin to the bride who is gifted to wear the wedding dress of her groom's mother. And she becomes Rachamim, El Malay Rachamim, which, as we know, in the Alvinu Makenus, this is a huge part of our recitations of Yom Kippur, invoking El Malay Rachamim, the Rechem, the Halal, the womb-like space, the mother, as Bina Ima Ila'ah, as Echye. Thus, Shekinah as Malkut, as well as Et, the Aleph Tav. Whenever you see Et, Aleph Tav in the text, that's also a hint to the divine feminine. And Adonai. She was introduced to Moshe as the black fire of the burning bush. The fire being the visible aspect, the revelation as the flame. Although the voice of the Malach Elohim was that of Memtet. So Ima Ila'ah as Harakamim is the source of the Mohim that when inherited and through Tikkun Hamidot, Mitzvot, Kavanot, we inherit that Yechidah state of Adam HaYisraeli, the aspect of soul that is Yechidah. And we remember that Chaya and Yechidah are not innately given. We all have Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, but Chaya and Yechidah are imparted through levels of humility, Tikkun Hamidot, again, and Kavanot. And again, as we saw in Parsha Shemini, the 2 Nachash intertwined The two serpents, we know it is the klipot that crowns Kedusha. And how can something crown you, put something on your head, unless it is above you, higher than you? Again, we are reminded mother is the first crown. And even Malkut, who some would say is beneath the masculine, is his crown. So to close out, I'll return to the text. How to treat sexual immorality according to the Bantu Israelites. In Bantu Israelite cosmology, sexuality is understood as a fundamental life energy deeply rooted in the very structure of reality. It never concerns just two individuals. It involves the flow of life across generations, the balance between the visible world, Zayayi, and the invisible world, Zaimpemba, and the relationship with the ancestors, Bakulu. The human body is not seen as merely a biological vessel, but a channel through which vital force passes. Horein self, and sexuality is one of the most powerful points. Thus, when we speak of sexual order or disorder within this tradition of the new Sak Afriki, we are in fact speaking of a broader cosmic order. Sexuality lived in a just, healthy, holy, and pure way contributes to the continuity of life, the harmony of the household, the strength of the lineage, and peace with the ancestors. Conversely, disordered sexuality is not merely a moral failing, it introduces a rupture in the fabric of relationships that structure the world. What is central here is the idea that the individual is never isolated. In the thought of the Am B'nai Yisrael, a person is a living node of relationships. They carry their ancestors, engage their descendants, represent their family, and are embedded in a network of alliances. The body itself is therefore relational. This means that sexuality simultaneously involves multiple levels: personal, familial, lineage based, and spiritual. That is why sexual behavior deemed immoral is understood as a rupture of relationships rather than a purely private fault. Within this framework, the origin of sexual immorality is often seen as an inner misalignment. Desire, which in itself is a good force because it participates in life, becomes a problematic force when it detaches from wisdom, lutsitu, truth, and responsibility. It is not desire itself that is condemned, but the fact that it becomes autonomous, no longer oriented toward the building of life. Uncontrolled desire is viewed as an energy that turns against the vital order. This misalignment is also a form of forgetting that one belongs to a lineage. In the vision of the Torah Aleph, understood as the heritage of the 10 tribes of Israel, all sexuality engages the continuity of blood and memory. It touches on lineage, the transmission of the name, and the coherence of belonging. When a person acts as though their body concerns only themselves, they break from this awareness. This could be described as a loss of relational consciousness, the inability to see that every act carries consequences beyond oneself. Added to this is the rupture with inherited norms, marriage laws, kinship prohibitions, along with the commandments of the Torah and the obligations of respect are not arbitrary. They are seen as safeguards established by the ancestors to protect life. To transgress them is not merely to disobey, but to destabilize a time-tested balance. In this perspective, the ancestors are not just figures of the past, they are guardians of order. And to ignore their teachings is to cut oneself off, cut off from a form of protection. For the oral transmission of our Torah is the lifeblood of our ancestral lineage. It's all there. So much that could be said. The Yesod below and the Yesod above. Brit Milah, Brit Lashon. All of it. All of it. In certain readings within the B'nai Moshe, there is also the idea that a human being can become permeable to forces of disorder. A person who lives in deception, excess, or irresponsibility may gradually lose their inner clarity. It is then said that they are caught in a dynamic greater than themselves. This is not necessarily framed in terms of sin in the Western sense, but rather as a form of capture by imbalance, where the person is no longer fully aligned with life. The spiritual implications of this condition are profound. First, there is an impact on vital force. Disordered sexuality, as seen as a dispersion of energy, a loss of inner centeredness. Second, there is an imbalance between the visible and the invisible. Since the ancestors and the living are in relationship, a moral rupture disturbs that connection. In traditional understanding, this may manifest as a loss of peace, recurring conflicts, blockages, or a feeling of being disconnected from blessing. Going back to that castration and the usurpation of the land, the disconnection from the land, the Malkut. The disconnection from the ancestral alignment, the ancestral traditions, fighting for integration, fighting for equality, fighting for material displays of so-called equality or wealth, but being disconnected from the true source of authentic shefa, authentic blessings. Outside of Eretz Israel. What is most striking, however, is that sexual transgression is often understood as a relational defilement rather than merely an individual one. It introduces falsehood, shame, jealousy, and distrust. It weakens trust, which is the very fabric of the household and the community. Therefore, it is not only the individual who is affected, but the entire network of relationships in which they are embedded. The consequences follow this same logic. What is impacted is inner stability, the strength of the couple, whether monogamous or polygamous, according to the Torah. The honor of the lineage and spiritual balance. A home may lose its peace, a family may fall into conflict, a person may lose clarity and strength. All of this is seen as a result of disorder introduced into the living system of relationships. In response, the approach of Nusak Afriki is rarely purely punitive. It is primarily restorative. The goal is not simply to condemn, but to realign the person with what is right. This is Shalom Bayit. This begins with self-mastery, learning to govern one's desires rather than be ruled by them. But this mastery is not isolated. It is supported by the community, by education, by elders, and by clear frameworks. The essential dimension is repair. When disorder has been introduced, it must be acknowledged. Truth must be spoken. What has been broken must be repaired, and relationships must be restored. In some cases, this may involve practices of reconciliation or purification, aimed at reharmonizing the individual with themselves, with others, and with the invisible world. This is a fundamental principle, the return to truth. In this worldview, sexual immorality thrives in secrecy, deception, and duplicity. Healing, therefore, comes through a life that is clear, aligned, and coherent. To live in truth is to stand in one's rightful place within the order of the world. Thank you. In summary, Bantu Israelite cosmology does not frame the issue in terms of abstract moral fault, but in terms of harmony or rupture within the vital order. Sexuality is a creative force. When rightly directed, it builds life and strengthens bonds. When misdirected, it weakens the individual, the household, the lineage, and the relationship with the unseen. The essential challenge, therefore, is to remain aligned with that which sustains life, connection, and balance. Baruch Adonai Leolam, amen, amen.
Amen, amen.
Toda Rabbi for the time today. We went over, but yes, all the references in the chat. Yes. How does Yakud on Erev Shabbat not make one impure or unclean on Shabbat? Yakud, when we speak of Yakud on Shabbat, we're speaking of Yakud on Shabbat after Chatzot. So after Kabbalat Shabbat, after Kiddush, after the good meal, and all the blessings, after Chatzot, after Halakhic midnight, is the ideal time to engage in that Yakud, to bring down those highest lights from Atzilut with the proper kavanot. So you would have already, ideally, you would have already done your mikveh purification on Erev Shabbat before bringing in Kabbalat Shabbat. So you would be clean. And again, that that Gan Eden, that Pardes, that sacred space beyond time in that Yakud on Shabbat, it's exactly that space where there is no pure or impure. So that's the fun of it. And that's why proper union is framed by these specifications, not to limit or repress, for people who, oh, what you mean we can only be together on Shabbat? I might want to, some people might want it all day, every day. But if your intention is to bring down holiness and to disseminate and multiply, that's the true Peru Urivu, being fruitful and multiplying. If your intention is to truly multiply holiness and order yourself in the world, then those parameters elevate that union and safeguard that union in the Carmelite where there is no pure or impure, and thus one cannot be defiled. So that is what they're supposed to mean when they throw around that verse, the marriage bed is undefiled. Baruch Hashem. So, Toda Rabah, we'll let you all get back to your families. Thank you again for joining me. Shalom, shalom, Toda Rabah. Rabbi Shula, shalom, shalom, Toda Rabah, Nasi Gavina. Appreciate you joining and all who will be viewing the replay. Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov.